Chinese President Xi Jinping has reportedly ordered the People's Liberation Army to prepare for combat. This comes ahead of an international tribunal on Tuesday that's expected to issue an unfavourable ruling against China's claims over the South China Sea. US-based Portion News said Tuesday that the instruction was given in case the United States takes provocative action in the waters once the ruling is made. The US and China have been expanding their military activities across the sea, stoking heavy tension between the two superpowers. China controls roughly 90% of the South China Sea, a critical waterway that handles some $5 trillion worth of trade every year. The Philippines filed a suit to the Hague Tribunal in 2013, accusing Beijing of seizing Scarborough Shoal, a fishing area that Manila claims as part of its exclusive economic zone. It says China's extensive maritime claims don't conform to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was ratified by both countries. Since then, the country has stacked up 15 claims against China's vast territorial expansion. China opposes the arbitration process. It says it does not acknowledge the tribunal's jurisdiction and will not accept its ruling. The Hague's ruling on Tuesday is binding, but the court lacks powers of enforcement. Usiang, Arirang News.
Last week's mass protests and shootings in the U.S. forced President Obama to cut short his European tour. He did, however, make time for the NATO summit in Warsaw over the weekend, where he pledged to send more U.S. troops to the alliance's eastern border. The move, which many believe is aimed at countering the so-called Russian threat, but this issue has proved divisive. Some NATO member states were not too happy with the idea. Alexei Yaroshevsky reports.
It was only last week that a potentially major breakthrough in U.S.-Russian relations happened. Washington and Moscow agreed to cooperate militarily in Syria against the common enemy, the Islamic State. But that was before the NATO summit in Warsaw last weekend, where President Obama again listed the threats to world security, ISIS being again on top, followed by the so-called Russian aggression, and the top three was wrapped up with the Brexit referendum. Confusing, isn't it? Although we have been down that path before. During the UN General Assembly in 2014, the US leader did exactly the same. First, he called Russia the second biggest threat to the world, to later ask for its help in dealing with the first place threat, which is ISIS. This time, however, it went beyond just words, with Obama in Poland promising another 1,000 US troops to reinforce the alliance's eastern border. All that certainly amid shouts by some NATO members that Russia was a threat to them. In addition to NATO military exercises, of course, on the Eastern Front, which have intensified over the last 18 months. But surprisingly, not everyone is on board. While former Warsaw Pact countries demand protection from the evil Russia, some Western European politicians expressed a belief that more military on the Russian borders can only lead to escalation.
Vladimir Putin has declared that war with the United States is inevitable if Hillary Clinton wins. Yes. Kim McClendon for The Inquisitor reports that Hillary Clinton brings the real threat of war, not Donald Trump, and that's according to Vladimir Putin, as Election News has Russia gearing up for a possible attack.
Two soldiers killed, another 4 wounded in the Donbas war zone in the past 24 hours. A day before that, 3 servicemen died and 16 were wounded. Ukraine has been hearing this cheerless news almost every day since the war started. The nights in the conflict region are especially violent. Militant weapons almost never go silent.
They are trying to trick us. At first you think a machine gun or a rifle is firing, but then you realize they are using the sound of shooting to cover the mortar blasts.
Last night, Ukrainian soldiers endured almost 100 attacks. Sector Mariupol, Sector Donetsk, Sector Horlivka, the most dangerous hotspots in the once peaceful region. The militants are using all kinds of weapons, often resorting to arms banned by Minsk. A day ago, 1 Ukrainian soldier was killed near Donetsk by a high-caliber mortar, which was supposed to be withdrawn from the front line.
Yesterday we were shelled by the self-propelled artillery and mortars. Nights are always like this, but it gets a bit easier in the morning.
Every minute the soldiers spend in the conflict region is a fight for their lives. The Russian-backed forces are often located just hundreds of meters away from them. The militants hold roads near their stronghold Horlivka in the crosshairs, monitoring every movement of Ukrainian forces.
Here the enemy is stationed just a kilometer away from us. They brought vehicles, mortars, and shoot at us from weapons we've never even had in Ukraine.
Sometimes the soldiers can't even tell what arms the militants use to attack them. The servicemen joke Russia has organized a shooting range in eastern Ukraine to test its new weapons.
That is some weird trail. I got no idea what hit the ground. A mortar shell would leave the crater, but this trail is too long for that.
Long battles and a short respite. This is how it goes for Ukraine, day after day, night after night.
Germany's Chancellor has, for the first time, publicly acknowledged that extremists could be taking advantage of the migrant influx to enter Europe. Over the past year, Angela Merkel's been repeatedly warned about the security risks of her open-door policy.
There are a number of terrorists who grew up in Europe, in Germany as well, who were then trained in Syria and came back, in part, even using the refugee flow to smuggle in terrorists.
Just like this before, specifically in Ferguson, following the police killing of Michael Brown. Is Baton Rouge carrying the same amount of weight as Ferguson?
It certainly seems to be carrying the same amount of weight. And one thing that's fascinating to me is the many stark similarities between Ferguson, Missouri and Baton Rouge, right? And so in both cases, you're talking about cities with large portions of their black population that live in poverty, that don't receive the best educations in terms of the education system. Baton Rouge is one of the worst educational systems in Louisiana, a state with one of the worst educational systems. And then you also have a police force that does not necessarily have the best standing relationship with the community. And so what we're seeing in the streets is we're seeing the same chants, we're seeing the same anger and same pain from residents, and we also, so far, have been seeing a very similar response to police. Military gear, aggressive police tactics, massive arrests. We've had, 150 arrests, I believe, in 2 nights in Baton Rouge, and so those are